It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Mindel Margarita Hornick. Your maiden name was Klein, and we're in your beautiful home here in Birmingham in England. And Mindu, thank you so much for inviting me to your magnificent home. We're in the garden, and Mindu, you were born back in 1929.
Yep.
If you could tell us a little bit about where you were born and your family.
Well, I was born in Czechoslovakia, in a small Jewish community called Vermaziv in Yiddish, Urmezu in Hungarian, and Ruske Pole in Slovakia. Ruske Pole means Russian land. Anyway, yes, it was a small Jewish community, very Orthodox. We had a synagogue, we had but the school was mixed. We didn't have a Jewish school, but we had cheder on every weekend. We had a cheder with a melamed that used to come and teach us, and he used to have to be on days who fed him. We always say, well, you're like a melamed, you want to be fed each day. Anyway, so yes, and we had a lovely home with an orchard and a garden that we grew all kinds of things. We had a man called Eli who would look after all the vegetation in the garden. And it was a lovely, carefree life. But that's my father's parents lived in a nearby village, just half a mile away or so on, near our village. But the rest of the family lived in, my mother's family lived in Prague, in Karlsbad. And I think in early years, this is my grandfather, they had 10 children. They also lived in this Carpathian village.
This is your maternal grandfather, Chaim David?
Yes, Chaim David, yeah.
And your maternal grandmother, they were very religious.
Absolutely. Well, that's it. We were Jewish, we were religious. There was nothing in between.
And you have a wonderful picture of your parents, yes. Chaya and Moses.
Chaya and Moses. Now, can I tell you about that picture? When we survived Auschwitz and slave labor, and we eventually ended up in Prague with an aunt taking care of us. Years later, I used to go to Israel, and I never had a picture of anybody, because the family from Prague that were in Theresienstadt, Buchenwald, Schwarzheide, they also didn't have any pictures left at all. Everything was destroyed. But the two aunts who left Prague in 1938-39, one left to get married to Walter Cohen, who became the main man on Kol Israel, on classical music. He was a classically trained man. And the other one was a Maccabi swimmer. When she went out, they persuaded her to stay at a kibbutz, which she did. She eventually got married there. And I've been to Israel many times, but the one afternoon we were sitting in my Auntie Shoshana's lounge, and she showed me an album of pictures that she brought back from Prague, which I had never seen before. And then I suddenly noticed this picture, and I nearly jumped out of the chair. I couldn't believe it, because I didn't have any pictures of my parents.
And you didn't know that the picture existed?
When she left Prague in 1938 or 39, I'm not sure, or 39 I think, she took these pictures of my parents with her, and she made up an album of aunts that unfortunately were also taken out of Theresienstadt to Treblinka in Galicia and God knows where. And so I was so excited. And they immediately took me to photographers, people that copied. And I copied these pictures for me, and I also, my sister who went to Australia, I'll tell you about that afterwards, the sister I survived with, and I sent one to my sister, and that's how I got this picture. But for years I didn't have a picture of them. Just some years later she showed me this film and this album, and I just couldn't believe it. That was their engagement.
And Mindu, you also have in your book a picture of your Aunt Ethel and Ida and Margit.
Margit, yeah.
That they also perished in. But this picture.
Now, this picture was also in Shoshana's book. Yeah. So these two were taken out of Theresienstadt and
on the right and the left.
Returned.
That was Ethel and Margit.
Margit, yeah.
And Ida survived, the one in the middle.
Not survived. Ida survived. This is the one that survived, and the one that I stayed with in Prague after the war for 3 years. She survived. She was married 6 months before the war. And she was separated from her husband for practically 6 years. And they found each other after the war. And they were in Prague much earlier than we survivors from Auschwitz and the detention camps came back to our wherever we were going. And she had a flat that I think I believe it belonged to an SS with 2 bedrooms and a dining room and a kitchen. So when we eventually came back to Prague with an aunt and 4 cousins that we met on the way in Auschwitz, and my sister and I, well, my aunt had her son who came back from the army. My other cousins, the father came back and the brother from the death march from Auschwitz. In fact, Timothy nearly lost his feet. They had to cut them off from the ice. And we were the only two, my sister and I, who had nobody. And she, Ida, took care of us. I mean, we were traumatized youngsters. I mean, I was only 16 by then, and my sister was 18, 2 years older. And she took care of us for 3 years till the Russians started taking businesses from people again and closing the borders. By 1950, all the borders would have been closed. And we were not the favorite people of the Russians, we knew that. So people that had gone through the concentration camps and survived all kinds of atrocities were not going to stay under the Russian regime, locked up borders. So they wanted to leave Prague, and it was difficult. England had taken already 10,000 Kindertransportees. They took in immigrants like your parents, for instance, that they've been gradually coming since 1934. German people, Austrian people, Hungarian people. But Canada wouldn't take any. They'd taken in as many immigrants as possible, and so has America for that matter. So the only one that was willing or had some kind of arrangements to get some young people out of Prague was Dr. Schoenfeld. But the other Holocaust survivors found out that Australia, if you bought a visa, you could go to Australia. And they were buying visas to go to Australia. So to help my aunt, who was by that time having her own baby, my Uncle Zolly, who lived here in England, and a friend of Simon's parents, said to help my auntie, he would try and get me to England. Well, he went here, there, no possibilities. So he heard of Dr. Schoenfeld, went to see him. And he said to him, Mr. Shlomo, I think he called him, if you give me £50, which was a lot of money in 1948, and you tell me that you're going to take this girl off the train and take her to your home, we have a deal. And I was the last person on the last transport that Dr. Schoenfeld bought. Because, and why this Dr. Schoenfeld was an incredible character. Do you know anything about him?
I do. I know his son.
Yeah. He would go around monasteries and non-Jewish homes that survived Jewish children. And he felt if these children had survived the war and their parents didn't come back, they should come back to their original.
He brought
so
before the war as well. He brought from Vienna children before the war.
But you see, after the war was difficult, so he had some arrangement with the government. If it doesn't cost them anything, he could bring, I think, 150 at a time maximum, and he would pay for the fare, accommodate them, that for at no expense to English taxpayers. English taxpayers, he would come. So this Dr. Schoenfeld, once he bought these children, he created hostels, and he found them a trade depending on their age and so on. In schools, all very often kind families would adopt them or house them till they are standing on their own feet. And so sure enough, my uncle paid the £50. Within days, I was a bit too old. By that time I was 18, and you had to be around about 16. No problem, I was given a stateless passport with the right age. So I have 3 birthdays in actual fact. I'll tell you about those. He gave him the...
this is your stateless passport?
Yeah, my stateless passport, there you are. And he there's no problem. So when the deal was done, my uncle waited for me within 2 weeks. I was collected at the station, but the sad part about it was I was being separated from my sister. The sister had survived. So anyway, it was a very tearful couple of weeks before I left. And they all saw me off, the cousins, to the station. And when I got to Liverpool station, Zolly was there. I had met him since because he was in the army. He used to come to Prague quite often. And he came and fetched me off the train and brought me to Birmingham. And I can tell you it was a great culture shock, because although Prague was eaten out by the Germans, they didn't destroy anything. They loved Prague, but they also didn't restore anything. But it was still, once the war was over, it was a cafe society. There were coffee shops, and the people were looking happy. But Birmingham was the saddest place on earth. Years later, I understood they had a lot of bombing here because there was a lot of industry, the car industry and so on. Also, they lost a lot of people. There was still rationing, and there was no street lighting. I mean, if you went out, it was quite dangerous. It was darkness. So my aunt and uncle never would let me go out after dark. Anyway, but with all of this, the compensation was that I was in a lovely home that was very caring. And that's it.
Mindu, can I ask you, going back to before you were taken away to the ghetto and then eventually to Auschwitz,
yeah.
what are your earliest memories about growing up, your earliest recollections?
Well, it was just a happy,
You had an
idyllic home with very rural, under the Carpathian Mountains, very rural, very beautiful place. It really was very rustic, because it wasn't about. And I just remember us. For Yontif, my father used to come home with new patent shoes and boxes of grapes, because his business was fruit and hay. He would buy up apples on whole orchards, and they would be transported all over Europe for cider apples, and grapes for wine and so on. So that was his business. He would come with big crates of grapes home before Yontif, and we would have lovely new dresses for Rosh Hashanah. Dressmaid, I mean, there was nothing you could go and buy. It would be a dressmaker who would measure us up, and lovely dresses for Yontif. And yeah, it was just a very idyllic.
Your mother baked colours?
We had a kiln oven, so she made the colours, and a lot of our neighbours who didn't have the ovens would put their cholent in the oven on Friday after the challah bake had gone, and they on Shabbos after shul they used to come and fetch the cholent back from our oven. The oven used to be full with cholents.
And Mindu, can I ask, the school that you went to, it was a government school?
It was a government school, and we had good relations with our neighbours and friends. But in 1940, our part of Czechoslovakia was given to the Hungarians, because it was Austro-Hungary before the First World War. And suddenly new laws came in, like the Nuremberg laws. I mean, they were a very primitive sort of society there, but they heard about them. Suddenly we found our friends and neighbours weren't quite as friendly with us. The Russians, they weren't quite as friendly with us.
And before you got on very well?
Before there was nothing at all. We had no anti-Semitism or any sort of hostility towards us in any way, or as they used to say sometimes, Żydzi, Jews. But other than that, we found no other hostility whatsoever. But the minute we had been divided and given to the Hungarians, so what the Hornick did was he immediately volunteered to recruit all the eligible men to go ahead of the German armadas to dig their trenches and all their lorries. And my father was a reasonably young man, so my father was taken away from us. He came home once and we never saw him again. And about a year later, our complete little community was ordered to come to the town center, loaded onto lorries. I mean, there was not the luxury of coaches, onto lorries and taken away, except for about 10 families, which we were included, that the husbands were in the so-called army. This Hungarian president, Hornick, had some kind of power because he collaborated with the Germans. And he imported Hungarian teachers, and we had, being a minority and being frightened, we were already being ostracized in one way or another. we were given, we went to Hungarian school. So for my sins, I still speak Hungarian. Not that you could learn so much in 2 years, but the concentration camps and also in Prague after all, there were lots of Hungarians, so the language did improve.
And at home, what did you speak to your
we
parents?
spoke Yiddish and Czech.
And do you remember when your father came back for that one visit?
I can remember as clearly. He was very tearful, and so was my mother. I don't know what they were talking about. We weren't told a lot because nicht for the kinder. They didn't want to worry us. They didn't want to worry us what was going on. But I know he came home once and he was very tearful. We never saw him again. But for some reason, this again I wouldn't have been here because had we been taken. So let me tell you what happened to our little community. They were put onto lorries and we never saw them again. Years later, I decided to read about things because although we were in it, we didn't know what was going on. These people were taken to Galicia and Treblinka, made to dig their own trenches, undressed, and they were shot into the graves.
From your village?
There was recently a film about it on television, but I knew already. We determined to find out, and we were there, left in that village. Can you imagine? Very isolated. Only about 10 families because the men were away for another till 1943 before we were taken to a ghetto.
Do you know what happened to your father?
Never. I do know years and years later one of his brothers survived, and again years I didn't know he survived, but an uncle, this Walter Cohen, who he was great on computers then, found out that Leib Haskell was his name, was survived and he's living in Haifa. And he contacted him and me, and we started we started writing. Then when I went to Israel, I went to see him. And he lived just like in the Heim, in Haifa, in an enclave that was just like Vermezif. They make their own bagel. My uncle said to me, you can go down and get some bagel. He said, you can speak Yiddish. Everybody speaks. It was just like going back to a village in the Heim. It was incredible. Yeah, so we kept in touch for many, many years, unfortunately. And he also had a wife and 2 children who never came back, but he married another lovely lady.
And did he know what happened to your father?
Yeah, so let me tell you. What happened was, I believe, when they were sent ahead of the German armadas, they were captured by the Russians. The Russians, I mean, these men didn't go with uniforms, they just had their own clothes with a Star of David, an armband and Star of David. And they threw them all into camps. And 99% died of typhoid and starvation. And that must be 15 or 18 years afterwards that I didn't know my uncle was alive, because he just lived like in the past. But for some reason, Uncle Walter managed to discover, and there wasn't this communication with internets and so on as it is now. And he got in touch with me and said, you know, your uncle alive, and of course I was absolutely thrilled. But also, he also had a wife and 2 children who never came back. So anyway, so there we are. So we, and he said that this man knew that my father died in this camp. The Russians could see these men. They never bothered to find out what are these men doing on this front without any ammunition. All they had is a shovel or a hatchet, hatcher or whatever they call it.
Mindu, when they took your father away, how did your mother manage to support your brothers and your sister?
To this day, it's a mystery. She was a very, very resourceful, very inventive. I remember her going to the farmers and coming back with a little sack of flour, because his business was taken away. Everything was taken away. And very often she would get produce from our garden and go and sell it. Yeah. And as I said, we grew quite a lot of stuff. But I remember her going, and I think one of the farmers must have known my parents, because they used to buy their apples. Used to give her flour to make bread, because we made our own bread, our own challah and so on. Yeah.
And how long were you in your little home in your village before you were deported?
Home till the end of near the end of 1943. 43, we were in our home, and then suddenly Himmler decided he wants no Jews in Slovakia at all. He wants everybody out. In fact, to this day, there's never a Jew in there. He wanted all the Jews, and we were taken again to the town centre and taken to a ghetto. And I thought it was Košice, but my cousin in Australia, Motti, told me it was Berehovo. Anyway, we were taken to a ghetto.
Do you remember that day that you had to leave your home?
Yeah, I do. We were told to pack our bags and go. And I remember my mother had, we did our own preserves and jams. Whatever she had, I remember putting it in a case.
What could you take in your bag? Could you take, what belongings could you take?
You could take what you wanted.
Do you remember what you took?
All I remember is my mother putting in these jams that she used to make herself. In fact, feeding us with them in the ghetto.
And Mindu, can I ask you, when you left your home, did you see your neighbours when you were taken to the ghetto? Did you see the faces of the neighbours?
No, we didn't.
Or did anybody try and help?
By that time, because of all the Nuremberg laws, they became quite hostile. It
changed overnight?
Yeah, I know. Well, it was a gradual change, first of all. That, and then as time progressed and the rest of the Jews were taken away, they also jumped on the bandwagon. Goodbye, Jews.
And what do you remember of the ghetto?
What I remember of the ghetto is that it was obviously, as you know, they closed off a part of a city or a town, that we were on a hayloft. We were again outside the town in a very rural area, and there was no room in the houses, and we were on a hayloft, staying there, I don't know for how many weeks. Then suddenly they ordered us to come again to the town center, to the center of this ghetto, and collected us. I mean, at no point did we ever know where we were going or what was happening to us. And put us on to lorries and took us to a railway siding and started cramming us in. And I think it must have been the last lot, because we were just by the door. My mother, we have two little brothers. One was 6 and one was 9.
What were the names of your brothers?
Shmuel and Yechiel, Julius and Samuel. Shmuel and Yechiel.
And how old were you at this time? 12 or 13?
Pardon?
How old were you at this time?
Me? I was then coming on to 14.
14.
Yeah. 15, yeah. Coming on to 14. Yeah.
And your sister was 2 years older than you?
Yeah, yeah. So, but when we eventually, after 3, it was terrible in these carriages. We didn't know where we were going. They just put a bucket in the middle, one for a toilet and another one with water. And they kept cramming us in. There were also younger families with children crying. And suddenly they stopped crying. I think a lot of them just died because there was no food or anything. And it was quite hot in those carriages. Well, with so many people there. Then after 3 days, it wasn't such a long way, but the shunting forward and backward, I think some of their lines were possibly bombed, or they had other priorities to get through people on the trains than our transport. We eventually arrived we heard this terrible clanging on the chains on these carriages, and it was opened, and funny enough, it was a beautiful sunny day like today, and one of these capos jumped in our carriage, and he spoke. They knew everything, these capos. He knew that this people came on a Yiddish-speaking area. He spoke, as we were at the corner, he spoke to my mother in Yiddish. He asked her, welche sind deine Kinder? And she said, well, this is meine Jüngerlichen, meine Meidler. He must have asked her how old we are, but I didn't hear it with all the confusion, because once it opened, and we just could not believe what we saw. There were these soldiers marching up and down with guns, there were dogs barking, and they always had loudspeakers going. We had no idea where we were or what happening. And he said, and they were shouting, schnell, schnell, and he said to my mother, let the girls go ahead. Let the girls go ahead. You will see them later. This is saying later. The fact, I think, that he spoke to her in Yiddish, and he was so assuring that we would see her later, that my mother looked at us and she said, well, we better do as this man says. The fact that he spoke Yiddish gave us some kind of confidence that it would be the right information. And as he was dragging us down, we weren't particularly tall, he said to me, you say you're 16 or 17, and you say you're 18, and du bist a Schneiderin. You are a seamstress. Du bist a Schneiderin, I presume. In hindsight, afterwards, I thought, you had to be useful for some kind of work. So we joined this enormous trail of people. And I remember looking back, my mother had like this spotted scarf, and we waved to her. But we didn't see my little brothers because it was such a crowd of people. And she waved to us back. But once we got to that main gate, the selection gate, Albert Macht Frei, we realized it was a selection. So we were, let me tell you what, afterwards I realized that there was a lady in front of us with several siblings about the age of my brothers, and a girl about our age. And when she could see her mother going to the left, and she was being pushed through the right, she started screaming. The SS was standing there, took the butt, put it on her shoulder. You want to go with your mother? Go with your mother. Didn't make any difference. I mean, at the time we didn't know, but these people went directly to the guest chambers. Anyway, we were pushed through the main gate, and as we were going through, we could see There were sort of watchtowers with machine guns pointing at us. Those there. And then and as we went through, well, no, this was the main gate, but there were other watchtowers there. And as we were through, when we were through the main gate, along the wall, there were all emaciated bodies in striped clothing, wandering around aimlessly, and some lying on trolleys, just skin and bone. We looked at each other, we really thought we had entered hell. We'd never seen anything like it. So, and they kept shouting Raya, Raya. They were obsessed with people 5 across, and they formed a line, to form a line. And once we formed a line, they started marching us off and taking us to a shower room to be deloused. We were disinfected, and we had to strip naked. Can you imagine girls of that age, just in puberty? Possibly we would have been very self-conscious. Possibly even our mother wouldn't have seen us completely naked. And they told us to really put the clothes neatly, because we're going to know where to find them. And at times, Hearst wrote that in his book. That was his main thing, that you should never know what was happening. That you should find your clothes. But when we came out, there was no clothes. We had to sit on chairs with men started shaving us without, the dehumanization you just couldn't believe what was happening. Started shaving our hairs, and then we went further along, and they threw your garment, wasn't our clothes. If you were short like me, there would be something very long, a tall person would get something that's up to her knees. And we were taken into, after many hours of doing this, that and the other. Oh, and then we were taken to a tattoo. Well, these tattoos were like on tables, and they were big transports, because we were then being taken with the Hungarian Jews, and they had a speed up. Himmler wanted as many, because he couldn't get. Did you ever read his book? He didn't get the hundreds of tanks, but he wanted for the Hungarian Jews.
The lorries. He bartered
with them. So, in spite of it all, he wanted. If he didn't get it, he would kill the Jews, and it was all very speedy. So he. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been here now from our village. It's just because my father was taken first. So he, I came to this table. My sister, she had a tattoo. He came to the table, and this man, I always spoke to you, got up and pointed to me, go to the other side. So whether he'd run out of ink or broke the needle, they weren't particularly gentle. Don't know, but I walked to the back, and I haven't got a tattoo, but I managed to get one from Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem had it. Amazing. Yeah. So I haven't got, but my sister had it, and my cousins had. They all had the tattoos that were on this transport on them. So then they took us into this block that already held 1,000 women, and that night they were completely, fully occupied. There was no room there were these beds which were possibly the size of this. 8 to 10 people were sleeping. But that night they were fully occupied. We had no room to sleep. So we had to sit up all night. There was no water to drink or to wash, or no for sanitation. Then after some, then we somehow dozed off sitting up, Suddenly dawn came and the whistle blew, sail up, and everybody was running. So we started running. I mean, we didn't mean anything to them, but we were being counted, sail uphill twice a day, sometimes standing for 2 to 4 hours. It just depends. And very often we had Dr. Mengele, it was called the Angel of Death, walking around with immaculately dressed, with shiny boots. And he would carry a pair of white gloves, which the Polish people were very good at glove making. And he would wave if somebody didn't look well or he needed so many for experiments, wave at anybody in the road. They had to step out. We would never see them again. And he quite often did the selections. And what the girls did in later times, they used to prick the fingers to draw some blood and put it on their cheeks to look healthy. Or if it's a sister or a cousin or a friend or a neighbor, if you didn't feel so well, they made sure they held you up while he was walking along. I know, it was terrible. So really, as I call my talks 100 miracles. Well, the miracle was that this man told us to go. Unfortunately, that my father was taken, we weren't taken. And then the other one was that after just coming up to 6 months, the Germans didn't do any of the work. They were only giving the orders. The block elders tell us that the women who kept order in these blocks, they made sure they were clean, they were distributing the food, and all of that. It was all done with the inmates. They had a lot of these Slovakian girls, and one of them was a friend. The mother was a friend of my auntie Berta, who we found an aunt. That was another thing of luck. After the second day we came in, my aunt heard that the ghetto from Košice had come in, and that they called us the children have come in. And Auntie Berta was there with two, you will see her in her book, with two older daughters, older than us, came to find us. And they did an exchange with somebody from block 14 to block 16 to be with her. And that was, you could be whipped to death. I mean, you didn't mean anything, but somebody wanted to be with some other relatives. And she took us under her wing, and that was lucky. So Auntie Berta heard from this block elders there, who was a friend of hers from her mother, that they are selecting people for work. And she said to her, take the girls between you, because they've got to get out of here. And we went to be selected. Again, we had to be completely undressed, show our muscles. I mean, it was always to dehumanize you. And when we were selected for slave labor, and that was such it was luck, because once we got there, instead of the dirt and the terrible food and the facilities of where to sleep in Auschwitz were just terrible. I mean, you were only there till you sort of...
Do you remember the food?
Yeah, it was, they used to give you, we had a little piece of bread which had sawdust in it. And we had, at lunchtime, we had a cup of soup, which was made of turnips. This was all slimy. I mean, the calories were 200, 250 calories a day. That's all you could have. That's all the allocation was. I mean, I didn't know at the time, but I decided to read about it because I was in it. I came out of Auschwitz not knowing what exactly went on. So I made it my business to find out what exactly went on, because you were just oblivious. And that soup also contained some kind of chemical called bromide to dull our senses and the thing to stop all women's monthly circle. So there was no menstruation or anything for women there because of the bromide. Very few people know that. Because there's no underwear given with these one dress or anything. So.
And do you remember the air, the feeling that the air, when you were breathing the air, it was very.
It was dirty smoke, the dirt and the ash constantly falling around us. And I must tell you this, after a couple of days, even before Auntie Bertha found us, we were crying that this man assured us that we'll see our mother, and we can't see our mother. So there was a lady there who was fed up with us. She said to me, "You see that smoke?" She said, "That's where your mother is." Well, who's ever heard of people going up in smoke? But we did feel this horrible grey ash all around us, the dirt, the misery, the dead bodies around. I mean, to describe Auschwitz as we saw it at the time it is very difficult. As I said, when people say, I mean, in my talk, I've said Auschwitz. There is no word in the vocabulary to describe. There's no language to describe what actually went on there. There was the dirt. I mean, now you go to Auschwitz, there is trees, there is grass and so on. There wasn't a tree, there wasn't a grass, there was all mud. They have now tarted it up for visitors. And the Poles, I know some of them were good and some of them plenty of anti-Semitism in Poland. They have got a tourist trade through our misery. They every time you go, I went, as you know, twice, they've got new hotels, they are extending the airports all the time. Who would have wanted to go to Poland? Yeah.
Maybe a description could be a living hell. It was like a living hell.
It was like a living hell. So when we were collected and we were given a coat and a dress and some shoes, and we were put on a train. And again, we had no idea where we were going. A group of 500. And we found ourselves in northern Germany, about 15 kilometers outside Hamburg.
Just show the map.
Sorry.
Near Bremen.
Hamburg. I said Bremen there, but yeah. It's outside Hamburg.
Outside Hamburg.
The Neue Gamma was in Hamburg, and we were one of their sub-camps.
And here's your registration card.
Pardon?
You have a registration card.
Oh yes, yeah, it says it was a mistake, but it was outside. What did it say?
No, Neue Gamma. Neue Gamma.
Neue Gamma.
Yeah,
Neue Gamma. Yeah, it was a sub-camp of the main camp, which was the Neue Gamma camp in. The main body was in Hamburg, and we were in Lippstadt. Got a book here, darling, of this. Lippstadt.
Here we go. Mindu. Here's the book.
Oh, there. I just recently, here one, in Lippstadt, that's where the factory was. I had it recently. I have emails all the time. I had one. They had one on the, I'll tell you about it afterwards.
And this was a munition factory?
A munition factory, yes, in Lippstadt. And it was a sub-camp of the Neue Gamma concentration camp. Yeah. I had this just sent to me recently to think it's still going on. As I won't be a moment.
So Mindu, this is a picture of your Auntie Bertha.
Bertha, yeah.
And she survived?
She survived, yes. She was in the camp, and through her, surviving, we survived, to be quite honest, because she is the one that changed us from block 14 to block 16 to be with her, and so she could keep an eye on us.
And being with your sister,
Yeah.
they must have also given you a lot of strength, a lot of
Absolutely.
courage.
Well, it's a known fact that people in the camps survived in pairs. They lived for each other. They survived in pairs, yeah. And with us was even more so. There was Auntie Berta and the two cousins. Then we found a further two cousins in the camp that were also on our trip to Nuyagama. So the tall girls were selected to pour in the hot gun solution into the containers.
This is the two cousins,
Yeah.
Elsa and Lily.
Into the ammunition containers, the bombs and grenades, without any face or body protection, and those were toxic.
Can I ask, do you
fumes.
remember when you went, the trip, your
I
journey?
remember the train journey, yeah. Of course I remember.
And going into Germany, you remember
Going through into Germany
to Hamburg?
and landing in a beautiful northern part. The factory was in a wood underground, and beautiful trees and fabulous airs. And I remember my aunt and another Barbara Lober, which I'll tell you about, Israeli lady who is in my book. You've got to contact her for me. We will come to that. Said, nothing will survive us. It's this beautiful air. We didn't have the smoke of the chimneys and the grey ash falling around us. There was this lovely, clear air. But make no mistake, the work was hard. Our rations were a little better. We worked for Luftwaffe, and what they paid for us was a soup. One soup a day, and then at the camp we got a small piece of bread which did not contain sawdust, and occasionally a piece of kvargel, a piece of cheese. But anyway, the thing was that soup was one of these German soups. Instead of being made of turnips or slimy, it had some kind of pulses of vegetables. It was in the country. So we got a soup that I often say to the children at school, you don't have to overeat. One good soup a day. And I maintain our survival, because by that time we were pretty starved, saved our lives, this one soup a day. Yeah.
You had so many miracles.
I know, so I started to call it 100 miracles that we were there. Anyway, but the work was hard. When we made the ammunition, we had to load up the lorries physically and pull the lorries to quite a long way to the railway sidings. And if there wasn't a railway, there was a bunker. And we used to were you on that trip when we saw the bunker? We would have to take those, yeah. Simon was with us on this trip. We'd have to lift that ammunition and put it into the bunkers, and the bunker was still there.
And how long were you in the ammunition?
The ammunition would have been about 9 months in the ammunition factory, yeah. Till May 1942, and suddenly we were woken.
45?
We were the night before told we will be woken at 4 o'clock in the morning for sailor pelvis. It was still being counted, and be ready for a transport. I mean, the usual. We never knew where we were going. Got to the station, and there wasn't a train. We waited and waited for the train. Eventually, it came. And the first time they put us on a passenger train with 2 machine guns either side. And as we were traveling through Ettin in northern Germany, the British Typhoon fighters went and killed our driver, plus many of our girls, thinking that there were Germans escaping or some valuable things with 2 machine guns either side. Anyway, the train stopped and we broke out of the carriages and started waving, and they came through northern Germany where there were about 42 or 48 of these slave labor camps. They must have found some others, and they stopped bombing us. 2 or 3 hours later, another train arrived, and they insisted we board the train again. We were very reluctant, we were very frightened, but we boarded it. And within the hour, the second group of Typhoon fighters mistook our identity and bombed our train and killing many more of our girls. When I looked up, our carriage, there was no roof. There were all dead bodies. And my sister dragging me out of the carriage and feeling if I was still alive, because everybody around us was dead. They killed a lot of girls. I mean, we were in and out. And the train stopped, we all got out and we started again waving, and they stopped bombing us. But they still carried out Himmler's orders. The Himmler's orders were to collect all the slave laborers of those slave labor camps around Hamburg, Bremen, or wherever they were. And there were 3 boats in Lübeck harbor. The Lübeck, the Deutsch and the Berg, and put them all there, and the Germans were going to destroy all the camps and torpedo those boats, killing all the slave laborers. However, the Swiss intelligence heard the message, and they tried to get hold of the British, who were fighting like maniac, because Churchill said, take as much of northern Germany as possible. We do not want the Russians to get in. And they were fighting like maniac. I mean, they must have known that there were slave laborers that kept bombing these trains. The Germans weren't running away. They had to stay where they were. Anyway, so sorry, where was I?
It's you were going to go on the death march or with the train.
Yeah. So they got us out, had to form a line again, and started walking in the direction of Lübeck. But we reached a small harbour town called Plön, and by that time we were only about 330 of us. We reached the small town of Plön. It was set on an embankment like this, and there was the small harbour. They still tried to get us into some boats that they were going to hand us over to the Red Cross. But the thing was to destroy us. But it was difficult. There were houses around. So, and we refused to move off the hill. They were shooting guns in the air, but we were so traumatized by the 2 shootings of the trains and by the we had some wounded, we had some sick girls, so we just sat there and didn't move. By that time dusk fell, and our Lagerführer suddenly appeared. We didn't see him anywhere on those journeys, and stood in front of us on this embankment as we were sitting there, traumatized, exhausted and shocked. And he said to us, puts his hand on his heart, and I thought always that I was hallucinating, and I'll tell you in a moment why it confirmed to me when I went to Hamburg that it was true. He said, I've been to you like a father. We are going into captivity and you are free. And with that he took the elaborate hats off and put it on the embankment. They all disappeared. all the soldiers, because the Allies were on their heels. And we sat there, stunned, not knowing where we were. And there was still the war going on. We heard explosions and bomb grenades all over. And believe it or not, once the guards have gone, ironically, we felt very lost without our killer guards there, because we didn't know where we were. So we sat there till the next morning, and we started sort of drifting out to see. We had a lot of sick girls, see if somebody would give us some water for the ones that felt better. Nobody would open the door to us.
This is...
I mean, the Germans, they were also terribly
This is the civilians?
Yeah, the civilians, nobody told.
And this is in
About
Lübeck?
48 hours later, we heard some noise, and there was a tank, 2 jeeps, and 2 outriders, and that was a liberation. Another 48 hours went past, and suddenly the medical corps arrived and corrected us and put us in a school and started treating the sick and the wounded and all the and our starvation. And we weren't very happy because they gave us very light foods. And how right they were at the time, we weren't very pleased. We wanted food because the people like in Belsen, that they opened the German food stores, died with food pieces in their mouths because
the body couldn't
after years of starvation you could not take the food.
This was the Americans,
the Americans, but the British, but they learned their lesson from Belsen. So when they found us, they gave us our medical corps, the Red Cross knew what to do. There was another miracle. They gave us very light foods and started treating all our...
So who was the liberators?
British.
Was British?
British.
Were there any American soldiers as well?
No, they were all British. The British liberated northern Germany. That part of Germany was liberated by the British. Anyway, so what I was going to say is...
do you remember the food that they gave you?
Yeah. There was a lot of sort of like porridge and rice and milk. But it was right. At the time we felt it was not good. But and then gradually they increased. But there they were in Plön, and I've had pictures from Plön. I've had, not long ago, 2 girls at a school lecturing that they had 350, they called them, well, 320, Hungarian women in 1945, May the 8th, in their town, looking for food, trying to feed them. And they were reminiscing it, a history lesson as to us that we were in Plön. But it was a small town, so what was they going to do with us? So the British started looking round. They found a holiday village called Hafkruk, which was something like Wales. They went in and ordered, well, a lot of the Germans were getting away from the war, ordered them to leave everything in their homes. And just the only people that were exempt was the butchers, bakers, anybody who would supply food, and the post office, and told them to leave everything that they're breaking slave laborers to survive the Nazi atrocities. And we moved into these villas, and then lots of others came, the people that survived the death marches of those slave labor camps all around. And so we had Hungarians, we had gypsies, we had all kinds of people there. And so Auntie Berta got a villa for us, all of the other cousins, so that we were 6 cousins together with us, and Auntie Berta was doing the cooking. The United Nations supplied and we were there for about 3 months, and they suddenly came with a the United Nations, I mean, they did an incredible job because it was so difficult after all. They came to us, where do you want to go? So Auntie Berta again said to us, we'll go back to Prague and see who survived, because the rest of our family lived in Prague and Karlsbad. And we were told on our coach they're going to take us to a big school. And then one of our members should go to the United Nations office, because when they found groups of survivors as to where they came from, they would take names and put notices up on the wall. They called placards. Put them all up so that people, when they day after day, that survivors, as they came into Prague, and Auntie Ida knew we were alive, but we didn't know that she was alive. That's this Auntie Ida. That's the one. She was an incredible lady. Auntie Ida was gave the left. Okay, she left her address. That when we come into Prague, of Lodecka 3, I remember the address, and we should go to her address. So the 7 of us collected and knocked on her door. Now, there's not a question that there wasn't any room. She was like an octopus. She wanted everybody. And that's the husband she was separated from for 6 years.
Uncle Manny.
How about that? So again, we were lucky because we were two traumatized youngsters, and they were willing to take care of us. She was taken because the others formed little families. Auntie Berta's son came back from the army, and she had her 2 daughters, and the other cousins, the brother and the father, came back from the death march, and they managed to form a little family, so they got some flats. I mean, we were all near each other. And so my sister and I stayed, and these lovely 2 ladies never came back.
That's so sad. They were so happy in this picture.
They were taken out from Theresienstadt. They used to take up transports all the time. And she is the one that went to Israel with Maccabi. There's Uncle Zolly, who was their army, and there's the brother. They're still in their army clothes. And Uncle Zolly used to come, he was stationed outside Pilsen, and he used to come with, and this is Auntie Berta's son, Julius, who came, he used to collect tins because food was very short. And he used to say, and this is the uncle that came back with my other cousins, with Ethel and Honey. Yeah.
This is Uncle Julius.
Yeah, Uncle Julius, yeah.
And here's with your sister.
Yeah. Pardon?
Here's a lovely picture with your sister in 1948.
That's before I came to Prague, before I came to England here. Oh, here's Uncle Zolly with Lily, and this is the other cousin in his uniform in Prague. So we knew him, and he wanted to help Auntie Ida because she's been accommodating us, and things became even more difficult there because of they were leaving, and she managed to buy some visas for Australia. But I tell you, there you are. This is the one who nearly lost his feet. The doctor had to cut them off from the death march. And here is Auntie Ida in Australia with Molly, and she had 2 children in Australia. Blanche. I'm in touch with all of them. Well, some of the older ones are not alive.
Which is your sister with...
I'm in touch with Blanche and with my cousin's daughter, the one that's just seen Rochel.
And Mindu, can I ask you, when you went back to Prague,
Yeah.
did you remember it from before the war?
No. No, we never lived in Prague before the war.
But you had visited...
We visited grandmother in Karlovy Vary, in Karlsbad.
And had you ever been to Prague before the war?
Possibly have done, but I couldn't remember it. I did not remember it. Must have been when I was a little girl. Or would have done, yeah. But I remember going to Karlsbad, to Karlovy Vary, to see my grandmother. And we used to walk along the promenade where all the special strudel was that spruts that healing water for stomachs. I remember the ladies walking around and we were all giggling, were drinking the water. Yes.
And in Prague, you became members, you went to the shul,
Pardon?
You went to the synagogues?
In Prague, when we were members of Old Night Shul. Of the Old Night Shul, we were members. We used to go there, and my auntie in Australia kept a very kosher house. They belonged to a very Orthodox community there. I mean, once they emigrated from Prague, but in Prague we went with Auntie Ida too. They always belonged to the Old Noise Shul. So when we landed up in Prague after the war, we used to go to shul. I was there for 3 years, don't forget. Yontifs and so on. We went to the Old Noise Shul.
So, Mindu, can I ask you, you and your sister and your aunt, coming out of Auschwitz and out of the munition factory and the death march and what you went through, you kept your emunah, your faith?
Well, as a matter of fact, I had great issues with one above, I can tell you. We were very lax in Prague. We just did what we could get hold of. But when I came to England, my uncle was, in his young days, Zoli, at a yeshiva. He was at a yeshiva bocher, studied at yeshiva, and I came to a very Orthodox home. He knows, like the praises, and it was very important for me to belong somewhere. So I was taken into Jewish youth organizations. I was taken in, and I came to a Jewish home. So really, it wasn't difficult for me because
you had grown up with it.
I've grown up with it. I just came home, sort of thing. Yeah.
And in Prague, what did you do for those 3 years?
I went to school. I went to Dr. Eckert's commercial school, and while I was at school, after about 6 months, I started coughing all the time. So Dr. Eckert knew my background, rang my aunt, and he said to her, I think there's something wrong with your niece. And I had infiltration of my lungs, and I had to go to a sanatorium for about 9 months. And I had to have calcium injections and very rich food from the malnutrition that I've had in the camps. You see, you think you've come out and you can just start life again. It's not like that. Auntie Bertha ended up in hospital, in bed for about 18 months. Ilsa, my cousin, has got only one lung. One of her lungs was eaten up by the gun solution. And years later, a year or so later, I had patches on my lungs from malnutrition and possibly residue of that gum solution. So what happened, Zoli used to send me calcium injections from England, and they used to give me whatever fatty foods they could find in Prague. My uncles and my cousins used to come whenever they found a fatty piece of meat or anything. It was taken down because the sanatoriums were also short of supplies, but they had more than the average shops would have had at the time. Yeah. Yes, and so I was there. And I was at school. I went back to school in Prague, and I started learning English because it was the the plan was that eventually my uncle would take one of us to take care of.
He couldn't take both?
He couldn't take both. He had a job to get me. I told you I was the last person on the last transport, and even then he nearly missed that. No, he couldn't. And so Ida bought, and she managed to get 3 visas, and they bought the visas. But you know, Australia wanted them, this is just by the way, because I went to visit my sister, but we didn't see each other for 20 years.
20 years? Oh, you mean it must have been so difficult to separate from your sister?
We didn't have the finances, we didn't have the money. 20 years.
After the...
It was terrible. But we were in touch with letters, but communication isn't what it is now. I can get on the phone and see her. Yeah. Anyway, so she came here and I went there twice. But those people had a lot of hardship that they got to Australia. They had no accommodation for them. They had nothing. Nothing at all. So, but one of my cousin Lily, she was very beautiful. I can show you another picture of her. Married in Prague, Evgen. She is the one who's got one lung. Went to a recreation home and started painting at the age of 70 or 80. And she did the most incredible copies of masters, Picasso and Monet and all of those. She copied pictures. She was in all the papers. Never painted in her life. But the HAR, or one of these organizations, took her to one of these old age places for a recreation. She was in Australia. And she said she wants to paint. So they had paint. If you want to paint, go and paint. And she was amazed.
Can I ask you, when you went to England on that last transport, that last train, and you had to say goodbye to your sister, it must have been an incredibly difficult, emotional separation.
For 2 weeks I cried before I came. Yeah, terrible. But anyway, it was only a temporary situation. But in the end, it took 20 years before we saw each other.
And can I have to ask you, because I am so... You mentioned Rabbi Schoenfeld. There is a Schoenfeld house in a retirement home in Stamford Hill in London. In his name, they built it. It's a
Simon. Oh, yes, yes.
And they quote him and they asked him, how many people did you save?
Yeah, I know.
And you know what he said? That's the wrong question. The question is, how many people did we not manage to save?
Yeah, I know.
He was an unsung hero.
And
do you remember him? Do you remember him?
No, I don't remember him, but I know his sons. I went to 25 years after there was a reunion of the people he survived, and he brought people came from America, from Israel, from Canada, and some people came from America and they donated a Sefer Torah in what is the very Orthodox part in London?
Stamford Hill.
Pardon?
Stamford Hill or Golders Green?
No. The one in the very Orthodox part in London. Not Golders Green.
Stamford Hill.
Pardon?
Stamford Hill.
Stamford Hill.
That's where they have the retirement home.
I think it was Stamford Hill. And there was for the whole weekend, there was a dinner. He wasn't alive, still his sons did it. They'd written a book about him. And Jonathan, and they came all from all over the country to the... But I didn't know anybody. They knew each other because there were a lot of them, because they were in hostels for months and in homes, and they kept in touch. But I came across the boat being sick, and then on the train, not knowing what is going to happen to me. I was taken off the train and came to Birmingham, so I knew nobody. when I went there, but it didn't matter. Within no time we started.
Mindu, I have to ask you, that boat ride and the
Yeah.
train, do you remember that?
You know, and I went to that weekend, which was unbelievable. But what happened at Sanford Hill, they got all the roads closed, and they were dancing in the street, and the traffic lights were taken off, and they were carrying the safer store around. It was an incredible evening in honor of Schoenfeld, yeah. And I met his son. The other one, which I didn't meet, I met him last year. We did a program together at a school here in Solihull. He came, yeah.
And I have to ask you, Mindu, that trip that you did on the boat coming to England, do you remember that journey?
The boat.
The boat?
Yeah, I remember being sick, and all the kids around us, the youngsters were all sick.
And when you got to England, how did you know
I didn't. I remember being directed on this train. I think we all dozed on the train. And then my uncle appeared at the this Liverpool station, I think they came into. Yeah. And brought me directly to Birmingham, and I'm still here.
And it must have been wonderful to see your uncle.
It was wonderful. I mean, the warmth and the hospitality I had, and how made up for everything else. For everything else that I missed my cousins. And then people said, why didn't you talk about it? I said, first of all, nobody wanted to hear about it because people have been through terrible things in the war, as I said. And secondly, it was just too traumatic for me to start talking at that time. I think I needed a time.
To heal.
I said the schools, they say, why didn't you speak? I said, we needed a time to heal before we could speak. I remember Bernard Zisman. The first time I started speaking, there was an exhibition at the Birmingham Art Gallery of the Anne Frank Trust. And they'd shown a film, and they had some school children. And the Birmingham Mail, who I do a lot of advertising with, we were in business at the time with Miles, said to me, would you like to go and talk to the children? So I saw some of that film, and I started talking, and I burst into tears. So I said, well, that's no good. I'm traumatic for me, traumatic for the children. So I saw Bernard Zisman the other day. You know what a wonderful speaker he was. I said, Bernard, how can I speak and not get emotional? He said, think you're speaking about somebody else. I said, that would be very difficult. But he did help me quite a bit how to project and how to... I miss them. They were great friends. They moved to London because their daughter and son lived there. So.
And Mindu, how did you meet your husband?
I went to the Recorder Ball. Birmingham community had a lovely, young, active, vibrant youth groups here in Birmingham. And the synagogues, I mean, if you went to Singers Hill, there wasn't a seat to be had. And by that time, I met Magda Bloom. Remember her? She was a K.O. Belson survivor. And because I spoke Hungarian, we became friends immediately. In fact, Israel became a state, and I went to the Communal Hall with Dr. Pearl, and all the young people went, and somebody said to me, you know, there's somebody here from Belsen. I think my aunt's daughter took me, my aunt's sister took me. And I was introduced to Magda, and immediately we had a contact. Something I couldn't, an unspoken contact, which I couldn't have with other people here. Because if you told them what you'd gone through, they wouldn't believe you for a long time. The Jewish population didn't want to hear about it. And we weren't ready to talk. So anyway, we became great friends with Magda, and my aunt's sister was a dressmaker, and it was difficult to get material. She took my auntie's old dress, altered it to me, and they took me to the recorder wall at the Botanical Gardens. Did you ever go there? Yeah. Each year on New Year's Eve they had a ball, and my husband was there. And I went along with Arnold Benson and Morris Putzman and all of these that through Magda I had met. They came to call for me. If one of the boys had a car, it was a big deal. And they said, well, they'll take me there. And Alan kept asking me to dance, and Morris Putzman was getting very annoyed. He said, you didn't bring her. He said, why are you all the time? Anyway, and afterwards he rang me up and asked me to go and see Danny Kaye. And my auntie said, you can't, it's just people are queuing all around the block. He said, my parents go to theatre each week. My mother was a very cultured lady, and because they are regular people, I think we can get another ticket, and they did.
So this is a picture of your wedding?
That's the wedding, yeah.
And you had 400 guests?
Funny.
400 guests, wow.
Yeah.
And this is Uncle Zolly, a speech at the reception. And for how many years were you married?
Pardon?
How many years were you married?
19 years, 20, yes, 19 years. But we're coming up to our 20th anniversary. Yeah.
And
He died a very young man at a heart attack, yeah. We went to Blackpool after we were engaged with, so was Alan's cousin, my in-laws were with me, and that's me, we were in Blackpool. So I stayed with my mother-in-law in her room. We were engaged. And Alan stayed with his father, or his cousin, one of them.
And you had a good relationship with your in-laws?
Oh, wonderful. She was a lovely lady.
And Mindu,
Yeah.
they knew you were a Holocaust survivor?
Well, of course I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It didn't
it didn't
matter.
make a difference, it didn't...
No, nothing. Nothing at all. My mother-in-law was a very good friend of mine, as well as a very caring mother-in-law. I was saying that all these... she was an incredible cook, and to this day, I always say, my mother-in-law's recipes. All my pastry, biscuits and cakes, I have all her recipes.
And Mindu, your friends, knowing that you were a survivor, in the beginning, did they ask you questions about how you survived the war, or...?
They didn't know what to ask. The first things that really came, not only to the non-Jewish communities, but also to the Jewish ones, Schindler's List. That was the first time that I remember they hired the cinema. I'm sure you were there. The whole of Birmingham was there. And they hired the whole cinema to see that film. And when they came out, nobody spoke a word. It only just dawned on them what actually get on, because whatever you said, they just could not imagine it, and they weren't always so friendly, to be quite honest. Yeah.
And Mindu, you had two daughters.
Fun?
Your two daughters.
Yeah.
Did you ever speak to them about your experiences, or what happened to you during the Shoah?
Well, not to begin with, but later on when I started, yes, they know everything.
And they could ask you, and
Sorry?
they could ask you questions. It wasn't a taboo
yes.
subject.
Yeah, oh yes, they could. Yeah, I would tell them as it was, definitely.
But for many years you didn't speak publicly, you didn't speak...
Not a word. This is that. we weren't ready to talk, but also nobody wanted to know, and particularly the Jewish community, till the Anne Frank exhibition started coming on, and what's it did, Schindler's List. That was a film, and then was the other one, The Pianist. You made The Pianist, was there? There's another one. What was it? That was very explicit. The Pianist, and what was it?
There was a boy in the striped pajamas. That also,
Pardon?
the boy in the striped
pajamas.
That made a very big
it was
impression.
a cheap little booklet, and look, yeah, boy in the, that came much sort of later, yeah.
And can I ask, your sister in Australia,
Yeah.
she got married as well?
She got married, and she got a son and a daughter, yeah. And I'm in touch. Well, unfortunately, her daughter died quite young. She had a cancer, which was very sad. But her son, yes, I'm in touch with them.
Here's a lovely picture of your sister with her son. And Mindu, what was, when you saw after 20 years, how was that reunion with your sister?
It was incredible, incredible. We went to the airport to meet her. It was just unbelievable. My husband notified, because we did a lot of advertising with the Birmingham Post, with Birmingham Mail. Two sisters meet after 20 years. My sister, she was such a beautiful girl. But this is with my cousin Motty, who also emigrated to Australia. And this is, she's with the cousins. This is Julius' son. And this is your sister. Yes, they had a hard time in Australia. They had no accommodation. But I must tell you, Evgen, Lily's husband, I have to show you some pictures of them. He had some textile shops already in London, in Prague. And when the Germans, this is a Birmingham rabbi in Ireland. I was on a tour in Ireland, speaking tour, and he was there, David Singer. He, this is in the north. I cover mainly Birmingham in the north of the Black Country and all around here.
In the Midlands?
In the Midlands, yeah.
And you've spoken at many schools?
Many schools, yeah. And I've still got a couple of schools to go, a couple of academies from this year. And we just had an invitation to go to Oxford, the ladies' college where Margaret Thatcher was at. I've got to speak to Ruth about it. And I have wonderful support from Ruth Jacobs. And when we open to debate, after I've spoken for 25-30 minutes, she's very good when we open the debate. She's very knowledgeable and a wonderful speaker. Look what she's organized in this last week. Unbelievable.
And Mindu,
she's a dear friend of mine.
One of the main messages that you give is, we cannot forgive, but we must not hate.
Sorry?
We cannot forgive, but we must not hate.
Yeah.
That's, I think, one of the main messages that you impart.
Yes, I do. Because hatred has such terrible consequences. That's what it came through, hating the Jews and hating them. I mean, all these terrible things started in Lithuania through hate. The Holocaust didn't start with Auschwitz, started in Lithuania. I knew about it, but just recently they had a picture about it. This is some of my group that I took to Auschwitz.
Was it difficult to go back to Auschwitz?
Terrible. The first time I went, when I got home, for a month I was drained of all energy. I felt terrible, but then Yossi persuaded me to take another group, and that I felt a bit better then. But the first time I went did you come on the first group?
I'm in the picture.
On that one, yeah. You're on the picture. Yes, he came with Sybil. So you are
Arnold. Sandra.
Arnold and Sandra's son?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh my goodness.
And inside, it must have been so difficult inside a cattle truck to sharing your experiences.
I know.
And then
But
also in Lübeck reciting Kaddish.
Somehow in the darkest hours people have got some kind of inner strength to overcome things.
And you were given the MBE?
MBE, yeah. And 2 honorary doctorates.
We have a picture with the...
This was in Germany. I must tell you about this.
It's an air raid shelter.
Yeah, this when we went to Hamburg. And this is also in Hamburg. I took my daughter, my 2 grandchildren, and we had a load of reporters in schools, and we were being questioned by a historian. And that was in 2018. Now I must show you about my friend. So this story here again with at the school, and this is Anne Frank's stepsister.
Eva Schloss. Yeah.
She's a wonderful speaker. She's just giving up now. Now we were invited to. This was Magda and me. We went to the Queen for a tea party. The Queen of England. We were dressed up like that. We were going to the.
And here you're
with Prince Charles. Yeah.
Who's now King Charles.
Yeah.
They say with King Charles that he's very warm.
He is.
He's got a lot of
president of the. He's president of the what they call it now, the Holocaust survivors. So we were sitting across, and he said to me, "Are you a Kindertransportee?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm a survivor of Auschwitz." He said, "Really?" He said, "Well, you don't look like the survivor of Auschwitz." I said, "What am I supposed to look like?" I said, "I happen to be quite young." Yes, and it was so funny. He's Hungarian, and he's and it was a very meager tea, and there was a knife and fork, and when these sandwiches came, so he said, "Where's our lunch?" I said, "This is it." You could, and when the king gives sandwiches, you eat them with a knife and fork. He was very funny, but he's since done a lot of speaking. I have met him in London. Now what I want to, this is my granddaughter and my grandson.
This is at the University
very
of...
talented. He is in music and she's in art. And this is my cousin Elizabeth, like my sisters, my uncles, 3 daughters and her husband. And this is one of my daughters, and this is my other one.
That's wonderful. And you were given, this is
I was given the doctorate at Worcester University.
And receiving the MBE must have been a very, very... It's a very special...
Oh, it was a very, very special one. Now, what I want to show you is Barbara Lober, and I've got her address if you want to contact her when I just saw her because of the 80th anniversary. I had an email. There is a group in attached to the Niagara concentration camp group in Hamburg that are guarding the sites where the slave laborers were. For instance, where we were accommodated. It used to be, I believe, before the First World War, there were barracks there. So again, when we came from Auschwitz, we were about 18 to a block with our own bunk beds. There was straw on the bed and a blanket. And we could wash, but with cold water. So when we... so that was another thing that we think we will survive. We had a little bit more facilities than I'll say. But what I must show you is when Barbara, we went to Auschwitz, to Germany in 2018. Where are we? Where am I? Have you seen it with Barbara Lober? There is my aunt, Shoshana, the one that went on the boat to marry to Israel, Walter, the one that married. And she is the one that had my mother's picture. She took all her sister's pictures with her.
And
right. Now what I want to do is Barbara Lober. She was with me in Auschwitz. She was about 3 years older, and she came in 2018 to Hamburg for the special reunion and the memorial. I'm going to tell you yet another story in a minute about where we were being directed and we didn't reach Hamburg. To erect this incredible memorial for the 8,600 people that the British torpedoed instead of the Germans. It was the largest, do you know anything about it? The largest single loss of life. Anyway, she came from Israel, and here she is with her 2 grandsons, both engineers. These are her 2 grandsons, and she was on my trip to Auschwitz. She was on the train journeys, went all the trains, and I said to her, Barbara, and here is my grandson and my daughter and my granddaughter. I took all my children there. She said, I said to her, Barbara, am I imagining it that this Lagerführer came and stood in front of us with his hand on heart, telling us that he's been to us like a father? Or am I imagining it? She said, yeah, he did. She was 3 years older. She remembered somehow more things. And we became great friends. And in fact, I spoke to her only a week ago to Israel. Never saw her since Auschwitz, but we met at Hamburg again. And her grandsons are in touch with my grandchildren. They're lovely. Yep. Yes, we went. It was a very... But this one here, oh, there you are. One of the girls was, you know, we had to, as I said, things were easier, but make no mistake, our work was hard, and we had these camp women running around with sticks, and if you just looked the wrong way, you could be having a big hiding. So one of the girls, as she was dragging this big heavy lorry of ammunition, said to her, I am very sorry, I cannot. I don't feel very well. So one of these camp women started beating her with a stick, and beat her to the extent that she fell onto the embankment, onto the side of the road. She wouldn't let any of us go near her, and we had to carry on pulling the lorry. But when we came back, she still was lying there. None of us were allowed to go near it. But in the evening, there were different guards, and some of the girls managed to persuade one of the guards to let, she wasn't the camp women on duty, to bring her back. Mm-hmm. To bring her back to the to the camp. They brought her back and she died overnight. And some of the churches heard about it, and they went and buried her. And there was a burial. There was a stone with her name on it. And so that's where the picture is from. That was Germany. Yes, it was a very... But this is when I learned that when the fact that we didn't reach Hamburg is another thing that we are still alive. I wasn't killed on the trains because the people that they collected nearly 10,000 slave laborers onto the 3 boats. And as I said, they notified the Swiss intelligence herd and begged the British not to go near Lübeck harbor. They never got the message. And they were fighting manically. They, instead of the Germans torpedoing the 3 boats, the British did it. And they killed 8,600 people on the day of liberation. Survivors. 8,600 people. It was the largest single loss of life of World War II in that one day. And the few that managed to jump away, there was still a few Germans with guns shooting them into the water. It was terrible. So it was another miracle that we never reached Hamburg. Never reached Hamburg, and we were in Plön. And I said, and those girls, Plön is still commemorating how they saved 300 Hungarian women. They had to find food for them to... there was a history lesson, and they sent me the email. I'm having emails from Germany all the time. And I had an email, they were just now on 80th anniversary, commemorating the people, and they had Barbara Lober phone to one of the historians, phoned her, and she phoned back.
And Mindu, if I can ask you, what message do you impart to what message do you give over and impart to your children, your grandchildren, and to the future generations?
Well, just to not to hate, love your neighbor, and respect, regardless of color, creed, or religion. To have respect for each other, and love each other in a way just as human beings do one to another. It doesn't have to be a love affair, just to love each other as human beings.
So Mindu, I just want to thank you. For me, this has been, you mentioned that there are no words. When you described, Mindu, when you described Auschwitz,
yes,
you said there are no words. And I've been there on a visit, and you're right. It was, for you, it was a living hell. It is a living hell.
It was like hell. We'd never seen anything like it. Can you imagine? We were unsophisticated. They weren't the mobiles, so unsophisticated young people, particularly from the Carpathian.
Had you ever seen a dead body before?
No.
So here you were faced with all these dead bodies?
All these, they were on trolleys, these with legs hanging down and arms. I mean, we just couldn't believe what we were seeing. I mean, we just really thought how one, as a young person, would imagine hell, with these men wandering around aimlessly, and these bodies on these trolleys, and some of them pushing them around. It was just unbelievable, because by that time, don't forget the last year, they were getting a bit lax. They weren't hiding so much, which, according to Hearst, that's the Lagerführer of Auschwitz, everything had to be done very discreetly and very quietly. He prided himself on that. And he single-handedly, he was a son of a priest, single-handedly designed Auschwitz, the crematorium, the 4 crematorium.
So you have an article in Mishpacha magazine,
Yeah.
and the heading is 1,000 miracles.
Yeah.
Your life is really miracles. It's a miracle that you're here today.
Yeah.
And this was published in Mishpacha, in the family
Yeah,
section. But more than that, Mindu, you know that you are so positive, and you are. There are no words to describe you, because you are somebody we should all strive to emulate. You really are. You have such positivity, and
Yeah.
you kept your emunah after seeing the worst of the worst, the most harrowing, and your experiences.
Well, you
We
can't,
can only imagine what you went
can't
through.
live with it, because if you live with it, you end up as psychiatrist, couches and so on. You have to, I don't know, I suppose it has some inner strength
Yeah.
that can manage to put it aside and take it out, talk about it when it's necessary. I
That's
don't know how else to put it.
So, Mindu,
I
if
can carry on with my life, but in lots of other things. I belong to WITSO, I belong to many things here in this country, and to family, and observe everybody and love everybody. It's, how should I say? You can't live in the past. You've got to
move
sidetrack it and look towards
the future.
Yeah.
But you are an inspiration to all of us.
Oh,
You really
thank you.
are.
Thank
And Mindu, if you could give just a blessing to all of us, because we need your blessing.
Thank you. Yeah.
But we are so grateful, and I am so incredibly grateful. Isn't the right word even? I'm just so honored
Yes,
to be here in your presence, and
So what
there are no words to thank you.
So what are you going to do with all this
Oh, with your
information?
permission, we'll do many things. But whoever sees your interview,
Yeah.
their life won't be the same again. It will touch so many people,
Thank you.
and I am so grateful to you.
Thank you. Nice
Thank
to meet
you.
you. Nice to meet you.
So, Mindu, this is when you were honored by Queen Elizabeth, when you
Yes.
received your MBE, and it's got Prince Philip as well.
Yeah. Yeah, they had one or two receptions which I went to with Philip, and they were wonderful. They went round to every person and spoke. They were a lovely couple. Yes.
Well, you are so deserving of this.
Fun?
You are so deserving.
Thank you.